Welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture I'm going to be talking about politics and faith and the idea of political consolidation in the Holy Roman Empire, a topic that we're going to wrap up in the video lecture, and then the English Reformation before we then turn our attention to the Catholic Reformation. So this is something that was begun in class, but I thought that it would be interesting to look more closely into this document called the Augsburg Confession of 1530. Just to set the context, remember that Charles V and the Catholic forces plus the Protestant princes defeated the Turks in 1529. And at that point, Charles and his advisors thought that they could go back to the Protestant princes and sort of encourage them to return to the fold of the Catholic Church. And there was a series of miscommunications and possible missteps whereby Charles's demands were kind of made forcefully to the princes, and they then reacted negatively to that demand to give up their Lutheran ideas and faith, and in fact they protest that. So we have the idea of the Protestant Reformation, and I think that's an important term to actually know the history of. And not only do they protest, but they also then begin to spell out what it means to be a Lutheran in this document of 1530 called the Augsburg Confession. I've only included several of the articles. Article 4, you recognize, I think, at this point, justification by faith. Man cannot be justified before God through our own abilities. We are wholly reliant on Jesus Christ for reconciliation with God. This is one of Luther's main ideas that he puts forth in his teachings. Article 7, the Church. That is, Lutherans believe there is only one holy Christian church, and it is found wherever the gospel is preached in its truth and purity. So this is a second idea that Luther puts forth and teaches and writes about extensively, preaches about extensively, and that is sola scriptura, the gospel. The good news of Jesus Christ in the New Testament is everything, and that there can also be only one holy Christian church. So this is a profound statement that's going to cause great waves, obviously, as the Catholics would claim that they are the one holy Christian church. Later we're going to see that the Calvinists claim to be the one holy church, and then we already talked about the spirituali, or the different Anabaptists and radicals who sometimes are lumped together under the label spirituali. They claim to be the only really holy way of praying. So we have, again, what I've talked about repeatedly in class, competing truth claims. Article 10 is the last one. This talks about the Eucharist or communion, that is the Lord's Supper. Lutherans believe that Christ's body and blood is truly present in, with, and under the bread and the wine. So we don't need to get into the metaphysics again of the Eucharist, but this is a Lutheran belief. Zwingli rejects it. The Catholic Church obviously rejects it too. But so let's move on from the Augsburg Confession. So some 17 years later, after periods of peace and reconciliation and battles, we see the Battle of Newburgh in 1547, and this is a great moment of victory for Charles V and the Catholic forces as they crush the Protestant forces of the Schmalkaldic League on the field of battle. And in fact, the Protestant leaders, John Frederick of Saxony, Philip of Hesse, were both captured and imprisoned and removed from power in their territories. And Charles then installed Catholic princes in their place in these territories. And Charles then issued an imperial decree mandating in 1547 that all Protestant princes were to come back to the Catholic Church. Though Charles did grant occasional exceptions on the issue of clerical marriage and communion, the decree was clear that the Protestant movement was to cease in the territories of the Holy Roman Empire. Protestant leaders went into hiding, and they went to one city in particular, Magdeburg, which became a refuge for Protestants. However, the story wasn't going to end that easily or all that well for Charles V. Protestantism, and that is really Lutheranism, was too deeply entrenched in the territories of the Holy Roman Empire And there were too many people that, again, practiced it secretly. And at one point, the person that Charles placed on in power in Saxony, I wanted to say on the throne, but the Prince of Saxony that Charles appointed was a man named Maurice. And Maurice did something quite interesting. Though a Catholic, he himself converted to Lutheranism. And I guess that Maurice kind of sized up the situation in the Saxon lands, and he felt like there were just so many Lutherans that it would be in his best interest, in order to maintain his state, to make that conversion. So here we see evidence of Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote The Prince, and he gave advice to princes on how to maintain a state. And I think Maurice acts very much in a Machiavellian way, and I don't mean that in a negative sense at all, but he sized up the situation, made a decision in order to keep his power. And that really causes problems then for Charles V and the Catholic forces, as these leaders that Charles was going to rely on began to abandon his cause. And so then that's going to lead to renewed fighting between the forces. And in 1552, the Protestant forces, this is only 5 years after the Battle of Newburgh, defeat the army of Charles V, and they force negotiations with the emperor. And at this point, the story gets really interesting. Charles had been battling the Protestants. He had been battling the Turks for over 3 decades, 30 years. And Charles, at this point, makes a really big decision. He gives up. He goes into retirement. When I say he gives up, he abdicates his imperial title, steps down, resigns, and goes into retirement. And as he does so, at the Peace of Passau in 1552, it sets up what you see now pictured on the right, another peace conference, again at Augsburg, an important city, that leads to the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. And the Peace of Augsburg is truly important in the history of early modern Europe, because it declared that the ruler of each territory would determine the religion of that territory. The ruler of a territory determines the religion of the territory. And the Latin expression that you'll see in textbooks and often quoted is cuius regio eius religio, and that is the expression that says, to each prince his own religion. So Lutheran princes then were able to keep their lands and exist peacefully alongside Catholic territories. People were also able to migrate from one region to another based on their religious preference. So Catholics living in a Lutheran territory could move to a Catholic territory, and Lutherans living in a Catholic territory could move to a Lutheran territory. I mean, I think that's a fairly modern idea, that idea that people can choose where to go, that idea of movement itself, again, ushers in what we're going to call the early modern period. And at this point, we have the existence, though in its very early stages, of religious freedom. Now, the religious freedom did not extend at this point to Calvinists, nor to the much hated and feared Anabaptists. So that is the result of the Peace of Augsburg, and this is a really big moment. So what does Charles do? Well, Charles, as he steps down and gives up his title, he divides his territories, that is the Habsburg territories, into 2 parts. One is the Spanish part, and you see this in green. And you'll notice that what's interesting is the Habsburg Spanish lands included not only Spain, but the Netherlands, and what we would today call Netherlands, and part of Belgium. They included part of the Holy Roman Empire there, the Franche-Comté region, and they included Naples and Sicily, in addition to the islands of Sardinia and the Balearic Islands. So this is going to be given to Charles' son, Philip II, who himself is going to be a very powerful, influential monarch in his own right in the latter part of the 16th century. And the lands, the Germanic lands of the Habsburg Empire, that is Austria and other areas of Czechoslovakia today, you see Prague there, are denoted in blue. So there's this division of the Holy Roman Empire into 2 has, and that's going to be something that's going to come back and play a role in the future history of Europe in the early modern and even in the modern time. So, with that, I think we can close out the idea of the consolidation of the Reformation, and I think we can see that the Reformation in the Germanic lands was able to exist and to thrive in large part because of political and geopolitical issues. That is, there's a lack of consolidation. Princes are able to operate and make choices based on what they see as their best interest. That is the Machiavellian principle of maintaining a state. So a prince might adopt Lutheranism against the Catholic emperor to control those lands, to control the taxes, to control the church, courts, and all of that. And I think that's what's so important. So if you have any questions about this, let me know. I think the last thing that I would say before we get to Henry, and I'll flip back to the Peace of Augsburg. Charles V really represents the last great hope of unifying all of Europe under one power, under one emperor. And this is something that we've talked about from the Roman Empire to Charlemagne to maybe Frederick the Great in the 13th century, whom we really never talked about, so don't worry if that name doesn't ring a bell. Charles, in the early modern period, was this last great hope of one emperor, also one faith, that is Christian Europe. Christian Europe is now divided. The political idea and entity of the empire is divided, and we're not going to see this unity come back to Europe really until Napoleon in the early 19th century, and then Hitler in the 20th century. So this is truly, I think, a big moment. So moving on. The English Reformation, I have up here the two principal characters. You see Henry VIII on the right, the English monarch of the Tudor dynasty. You see his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and I think the textbook goes into the story quite well. I think you know the story that Henry married his brother's wife, Catherine. This was something that Henry VII, the first Tudor king, imposed on Henry to keep an alliance between England and Spain intact. So we see again marriage diplomacy and geopolitical concerns. The fact is, Henry was not all that happy with Catherine, and after 18 years of marriage, he didn't have a son. They had one daughter. That daughter was Mary, and Henry really felt that the English crown and the Tudor dynasty really needed a male. That is, to have a female, which was possible according to English law, really weakened the power of the Tudors, weakened the kingdom of England. So Henry's desire is to get rid of his wife, Catherine, and he comes up with all sorts of schemes saying that God is really punishing Henry for having married his brother's wife. That shouldn't have happened, but a papal dispensation by Julius II allowed the marriage to happen. And again, I think the story is pretty well known and well covered in the textbook, so I don't really want to go into all of that itself. But I do want to talk about the end result. The end result was that Henry, at some point, with the work of his clergy and his advisors, in particular a man named Thomas Cromwell, was able to arrange a separation of England from the Roman Catholic Church. This had never happened before, so this is really truly noteworthy. Henry takes the entire English kingdom and all of its subjects out of the Catholic Church and separates from it. Again, this had never happened. And in doing so, Henry then relies on the English Parliament to pass a series of acts that legalize and give legitimacy to this move of Henry's. So Parliament's going to pass an act of succession that declares the children of Henry and his wife Anne of Boleyn, the woman he married after leaving Catherine of Aragon. And remember that Henry had been asking and desperately begging for an annulment from Catherine and not getting satisfaction. So with the help of Parliament, he's able to leave his wife, get married to Anne Boleyn, and then we have the Act of Supremacy, which established the Church of England, and at the head of the Church of England is in fact the English King Henry. So therefore the separation with the Roman Catholic Church is complete. And with that, I'll stop. If there are questions, please let me know. Thank you.